On today's World Insight, as unusually heavy rainfall and record heat hit big parts of the world, extreme weather takes a toll on farms and crop yields. How can nations prepare for dwindling food supplies, not only due to global warming, but made worse with conflicts and geopolitics?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Record heat waves, raging wildfires, heavy downpours and floods. These extreme weather now plague countries around the world. From July the 29th to August the 2nd, Typhoon Doksuri brought heavy downpours in North China and resulted in floods and geological disasters. And over the past few days, the typhoon-induced heavy rains have kept pushing the water level of dozens of rivers in Heilongjiang above the warning mark. The province is China's food basket, a major grain-producing area. Though rescuers and disaster relief materials have been sent to tide over those in the flood areas, it raised concerns about the global food security. Around the world, heat waves, wildfires, and droughts are also endangering grain output. On August 3rd, Zhang Jun, China's permanent representative to the United Nations, called on the international community to fix the root causes of food insecurity. So, will extreme weather further exacerbate global food crisis? For more discussion on this, let's loop in our panelists. In Washington, D.C., Salim H. Ali, chair of the Department of Geography and Special Sciences, and the Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and Environment at the University of Delaware. In Beijing, Zhang Jianyu, Executive Director of BRI Green Development Institute. Also in Beijing, Zhang Junjie, Director of the Initiative for Sustainable Investment at Duke Kunshan University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us for the discussion on such an important topic. Now, first of all, Mr. Zhang Jianyu, tell me more about your assessment of the extreme weather patterns that we have witnessed in China and in the next few days as well, in terms of its impact on northeastern part of China and also on Henan province.
I think the impact on the food supply, food security is the topic that we're discussing here today. But I just want to highlight that it's probably not just on the food supply itself. It's also going to be on the entire circulation system. It's also going to be about people's behavior, people's reaction to this chain of effects. So this is not a darn warning, but I think just worse is coming. So we really need to sort of gather ourselves, really to start to think about how to deal with this extreme situation.
We have observed many extreme weather events in the last July, including heat waves and also flooding in many parts of China. Although it's difficult to attribute a specific event to climate change, this could be due to natural weather variability, but climate change definitely plays a part according to the studies of scientists. Therefore, this is a very concerning signal that the climate change has already been occurring and negatively impact our economy and our livelihoods.
Let's just take a look specifically at these two areas. Northeastern part of China, it is one of the biggest rice producers of this country. Professor Zhang Junjie, it is providing 1/3 of the rice exports of China, 1/4 of the rice commodities in China, 1/5 of the rice productions in China. Meanwhile, Henan province, it is a major producer of grain in this country. So what does that mean when these two areas are going to be and have been impacted by extreme weather pattern. What does that mean for China's food security for this year?
This is a very serious impact on not just China's food security, but also global food security, because the Chinese food market is closely connected with the global market. And China's three main staple crops, corn, wheat, and also rice, they are all negatively impacted by the extreme weather events, like the heavy precipitation and also the extreme temperature in this area. So therefore, there will be a rippling effect, not only threatening the food security in China, but also cause a stir in the already very tense international food market.
Professor Ali, now, in terms of weather reports and forecast, it seems that we are making progress worldwide to inform the public about what's likely to happen. But this would not be able to a larger extent, when facing extreme weather patterns and its extreme impacts on the food security issue. So where are we now?
Yes, so the weather is a complex system phenomenon, which means that in the short term, it's very difficult to predict particular weather events. But in the long term, it's easier to predict patterns. So this is a very kind of counterintuitive reality of complex systems. So that's why we can't predict the weather for more than 10 days or so. And we probably never will be able to, because that's the very nature of complex systems. But long term, we can predict that there is going to be greater variation, that there's going to be warming in certain areas of the ocean. So that's what's happening now. So what we have to prepare for is either we have crops which are more resilient to variation, whether it's precipitation or it is other forms of extreme change. And that is potentially possible. That's where genetic engineering and so on come in. Or we have to look for more resilience in having other sources of carbohydrates, particularly, because a lot of the concern you are raising from the examples are the grain crops and the carbohydrate production, the protein production we can get from the ocean, other sources as well.
We see northeastern part of China, Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Liaoning provinces, the three big provinces in China's northeastern part, have been experiencing the impact of Typhoon Doksuri, and likely in the coming few days, Typhoon Kanun. So how do you see the combination of two typhoons influencing one area that has not necessarily been frequented by typhoon and its impact? What are they telling us at this point?
Yes, so with typhoons, they can be certainly a blessing in disguise if you want to be able to store water, if you have infrastructure to store water. So there are many island states which depend on typhoons to actually store water for other parts, because they don't have other sources of fresh water. So, but what happens is if you don't have that infrastructure, then the typhoons can create havoc. So I think for typhoons, we'll really have to develop adaptive structures. There are plenty of countries which have had a long history of typhoons and they've developed infrastructures to deal with them, like the Philippines particularly. But we just have to develop.
What kind of infrastructure are you referring to,
so,
for example?
For example, reservoirs, which would be able to store water when you have massive rainfall events, and then use that later when it's necessary.
Have we ever had some kind of studies, Professor Ali, just to follow up what you just said, whether the building of infrastructure like these will be able to produce what percentage of impacts by extreme weather? Do we have any assessment, predictions?
Well, I mean, there is a history of using infrastructure to irrigate areas which would otherwise not be arable. Much of the United States breadbasket is the Central Valley of California and Yuma, Arizona. These are not areas which have natural proclivity to produce food. But because of infrastructure, in many cases misguided infrastructure, we have been able to do it. So human ingenuity can do it, but we have to focus on what is most ecologically and economically efficient.
Well, I think there's a good sort of comparison between the reservoir system and the food sort of system that humans have been building. I think we we do factor into our resilience capacity in the extreme situations. And the recent weather scenario is just one of them. But I want to point out that it's really sort of the climate change that has introduced the extreme uncertainties that we're not prepared for. I think the most recent, the rainfall situation, the flooding in northeast China around Beijing, where I live, is definitely a good example. We have been building, as Ali said, not necessarily reservoirs, but holding tanks and holding areas to prepare for this kind of situation, but nobody really prepared for this kind of downpour. Also, for the food system that you referred to earlier, I think there's a global circulation supply chain of food system that prepare for extreme situations, so we can balance it out, between countries. But now, both of the war, geopolitics, and also climate change, I think has introduced more protectionism of each country. So, production-based countries has been affected, and countries with resources try to do more to hold back, and that will reduce global circulation, and that will further exacerbate the supply and security situation that we're facing. According to a recent report, there are about 258 million people in 58 countries are already suffering from extreme shortage of food supply, and you can imagine how fragile and vulnerable they will be further becoming, under this kind of unexpected uncertainty situations.
At this point, do we know much measures that can be taken in order to reduce, shall I say, the harms that the extreme weather patterns have already had in northeastern part of China and central China?
So definitely we have approaches to mitigate the impacts caused for the weather events that have already occurred. But more importantly is that we need to do to prevent and also to adapt to the future climate events like this. So this is more important. Even if we stop emitting carbon dioxide today, we are still observing many events like this because the temperature rise has already been very close to the 1.5 degrees. So therefore, many things that we need to do in order to provide food security, energy security at the same time. So for example, we need to build an agriculture system that is climate resilient, for example, for those disease tolerant and drought tolerant crops development using the engineering approach, biological approach, and also for the infrastructure development. Then we need to build to prevent the future flooding and also the future the drought, improve drainage system, and more energy efficient designs. And also very important is the early warning systems that several years ago we did the study for the World Bank. We proposed that China needs to invest more on those early warning systems that's a public good and can provide it to those vulnerable communities. And last but not least, and education and community engagement is extremely important because there's numerous communities, they are negatively impacted by climate change, but most of them, they are unaware of our weather pattern is changing and will continue to change. So therefore, education is extremely important.
Maybe we can go more specific, Mr. Zhang Junjie. For example, when it comes to resilient species of crops and also grains, how much do we know the speed can be in terms of research and also implementation at the grassroots level for the farmers? I think that's one of the crucial things, isn't it? And also in terms of infrastructure, what about the costs and benefits and also the speed of making it happen? This is going to be extremely important for everyone watching our program today.
Well, our agriculture has been, in China has been existing for thousands of years, and our Chinese farmers has been adapting to the climate change gradually in history. But back in history, we did not have a lot of means to fully mitigate those negative consequences of climate change, and not until now that we have more engineering and scientific approaches available. So therefore, we have already observed many positive signs that those approach they are available. I want to point out one point is that for those engineering approach, they have a limit. So therefore, I would like to go back to the Professor Ali's approach that the ecosystem-based solution now is becoming very important, because in this way, with the engineering approach and with the ecosystem approach, then we can maximize our the adaptability to the climate change in the future. So therefore, I do think that in recent years, in our urban design, in our infrastructure, in our agriculture, in our industrial planning, we do incorporate those climate resilience ideas. However,
such as
urban flooding, since more than 1 decade ago, we have been, for example, sponge city advocated by the Chinese government, and many local community, they have been including my community and my university, have been adopting the sponge city design ideas and to absorb the extreme precipitation, and this indeed helps our adaptation.
Mr. Zhang Jianyu, I know there are a lot of debates going on right now about exactly, one of the examples Mr. Zhang Junjie raised, sponge city, whether that's going to perform when extreme weather patterns like this happens, whether it is resilient enough or powerful enough. Meanwhile, there's also debate about whether sponge city was actually, built to achieve that goal or not to begin with. That's just one of those examples. So how do you see this debate? And once again, when I ask Mr. Zhang Junjie about the cost and the benefits, what is your assessment?
I think resilience is really important, and I think that's something we have been trying to factor into our toolbox dealing with extreme situations, including weather situations, for a long time. But I really want to have a different take on this, because if you look at the data from 2008 to 2018, that the biggest factor that has led to the loss of food supply and also livestock is actually not floods, is actually droughts. So today we may be prepared for the flooding because it just happened, but I think what will happen in the next 2 or 3 years, there's going to be extreme drought, and then what we'll do. So again, I think including global cooperation and circulation to balance things off, I think is really and has been one of the main tools of human beings to deal with this. That's why I said earlier, I think the most recent sort of geopolitics and also the protectionism some countries are building for themselves will really exacerbate the already sort of vulnerable system that we're in already. So I really want to call for more global cooperation and deal with this, not just on the sort of the small issues like food supply, but also on other bigger issues. And what about fertilizer? Fertilizer contribute to 35% of the cost of the farmers and a huge impact on the productivity. So I think adaptation is one thing, but also how to think about to deal with the situation is probably even more important.
Absolutely, there are so many details, along this production chain, the cost of the seeds, the type of the seeds, the kind of a fertilizer, and the content of the fertilizers, and the list goes on. It's a very complicated whole set of issues. But Professor Ali, I know you want to speak on this point, and also especially the vulnerability of global South in terms of extreme weather patterns and the preparedness to deal with it.
Yes, so I mean, within the United Nations system, in one of my roles, I serve on the UN's International Resource Panel, and the lexicon is using this term nature-based solutions a lot in the UN. And by that, what we mean is somewhat similar to what Professor Zhang was talking about, where you are building natural systems that can provide ecosystem services like having wetlands which are protected. Now that's much easier for developing countries to do because they don't have as much infrastructure development, but they do have these natural systems. So if we can conserve those natural systems like wetlands, and we have an international treaty on wetlands, the Ramsar Convention, which has been around for around 50 years, if we can use those mechanisms to then build resilience in developing countries, that'll be a much faster and economically efficient way. But at the same time, in cases where we do not have that, then we will need to think about human engineered solutions as well. And we need to be realistic about what is possible in both cases.
Mr. Zhang Zhenjie?
I totally agree with Professor Ali. So for the developing countries, they are more vulnerable to climate change than the people in developed countries, not because they rely more on those climate-related industry like their income mainly from agriculture, and also they spend more time outdoors in their jobs, and also they have less adaptability to climate change. So therefore, extremely important. And given that the climate changes continue to happen in the future, it's extremely important to help the people in developing countries to adapt to climate change. So in these countries, as Professor Ali mentioned, using ecosystem-based solutions, but also there are many practices they have already been used and or piloted in many countries, like in China, in agriculture, and through international collaboration. It is very important for those people in developing countries to access to the practices and the know-hows they have already been practiced in China. And also China is the largest developing countries, so therefore China can provide many experiences for those countries. And also, in addition, international collaboration can also share technology and information. You mentioned very important, it's about the disaster preparedness and early warning system. And this early warning system preparedness and the modeling approach, for example, can be shared globally by providing information to all people. So this is the global public goods.
Mr. Zhang Zhenyu, I know China has been preparing over the past few years on the food security issue. Specifically from every government level, there is plan, and certainly there is expectation for the implementations of the plans. So given that as a fact, how much do you see China will be able to navigate this time the extreme weather patterns and its impact on the food security issue in this country? This is one of the biggest countries in the world, 1.4 billion mouths to feed.
Well, I think China has always attached probably the greatest importance to food security issues. And one of the signature policy from the Chinese government is the famous 1.8 billion mu redlining of the cropland that is going to be strictly protected and restricted to crop supply. And I think when that policy was introduced, in almost 20 years, that people at the very beginning had a hard time understanding it, because they always think, oh, there's going to be global supply. Even there's a food shortage, we can go just buy that, from the global market. But now it turns out to be more difficult. So I think sometimes you need a sort of balanced approach like this, both in terms of building capacity, resilience, introduce more vitality into your food supply system. But the other one, you really need to have some of this redlining approach, like the 1.8 billion mu approach, to secure your bottom line. And I think only by securing the bottom line, make yourself stronger and more resilient, and more to a certain extent more open to global cooperation, because you have that kind of confidence and security built into your system. Again, I know I have been coming back to this again and again, but I think the solution is a global problem, but I think the solution is not local. It's a global challenge that we need global cooperation to deal with it.
Final words also from Professor Ali.
Yes, I think there is also a demand side aspect to this. We should be focusing on consumer preferences about food. There are some crops which are highly water intensive, and we have developed a kind of fashion for them. Avocados, for example, not long ago, we didn't have so many avocados consumed in the US, but it's become fashionable to have them like butter on toast. And it is an extremely intensive crop in terms of energy and water. Similarly, pistachios and almonds being grown now in some parts of the world where you don't have the right climate. Figuring out and navigating consumer choice also is going to be part of the solution moving forward. And also, of course, looking at smart subsidies, not perverse subsidies. Government's involvement is usually needed in food and water, but often we subsidize water in ways which creates a lot of wastage. So we also have to look at what we subsidize.
Mr. Jiang Junjie, also your final thoughts.
Climate change has a pronounced impact on agriculture in China and globally. So in the intensive margin, climate change has proved to can reduce the productivity of our land. So in China, it will negatively impact our yields of rice, wheat, and corn. These are three crops extremely important for China's food security. And also in the extensive margin, we find that climate change will also change the land use patterns and will reduce the availability of agricultural land in China. So therefore, there's a productivity loss, there's a land loss. Climate change will become a very severe challenge to China's and global food security.
Jiang Junjie, Zhang Zhenyu, and Salim Ali, thank you so much for joining us. Gentlemen, appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, you can always find us on YouTube, Facebook, and also Twitter. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.